Good morning, Houdat Nation. That's Bob Rose. I'm Brendan Boylan. We thank you so much for hanging out and tuning in to the Saints News Network pregame show, week number 5. It's been a little bit of Jekyll Hyde for the Saints thus far this season, but they have a great opportunity to go into the bye week with a winning record and build a little bit of momentum. Bob, before we went live, we were talking a little bit about that Jekyll Hyde, and certainly the Saints have some reinforcements on the way after the bye week, but this is a little bit of a banged up Washington football team, and we didn't know who was going to be active, who was going to be out. What's the update on that inactive report for the home team this afternoon?
Good morning / good afternoon, Brendan. Thank you for joining us, Houdat Nation. Hopefully our end result is far better than it was last week. But yeah, like you said, Brendan, Washington is coming in with a banged up football team, an injury list every bit as daunting as what the Saints have been dealing with. First of all, Taylor Heineke is going to have a banged up crew of pass catchers. Let's not forget about Terry McLaurin, one of the better receivers in the NFL. But outside of that, Curtis Samuel, their second best receiver, and Antonio Gibson, their leading rusher. They both have been dealing with injuries all week and very limited in practice, but they are active today. And then Logan Thomas, their star tight end, was placed on injured reserve, as was right guard Brandon Scherff. So pay attention to those matchups up front. And Cam Sims and the dynamic rookie Deante Brown are also inactive, for Washington today, who will also be missing their leading tackler on defense, John Boston. So that's what the team formerly known as the Redskins will be dealing with. I had to say it.
Had to get it in.
That's what Washington will be dealing with today. But let's not underestimate this Washington squad. They are a hard-nosed bunch led by former Panthers coach Ron Rivera. They squeaked into the playoffs last year, but gave Tampa Bay a run for their money. So this is no squad that the Saints need to be overlooking coming in.
Well, the Saints fans, they're certainly familiar with Curtis Samuel. Had a nice start to his career with the Carolina Panthers, and Riverboat Ron ended up bringing him over to Washington this past offseason. And Taylor Heineke, let's talk about that. What a fun story. A guy who was in the XFL just 2 years ago. He goes in and has a phenomenal playoff debut against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year, falling just short. Starts the year as the backup to Ryan Fitzpatrick, who has played for what seems to be every team in the league. But Heineke gets his opportunity. And so far, so good, I'd say, for the young man. He is an athlete. He can certainly run the football. The Saints are going to have to be very careful of that today. But you mentioned he has Scary Terry on the outside, who I still think is one of the best up-and-coming receivers in football. So with a little bit of a banged-up offensive line, missing a Pro Bowler on that offensive line today, how do the Saints have to attack a guy like Taylor Heineke?
First of all, like you said, Taylor is still a young quarterback. He's awful fun to watch, but he will put the ball up for grabs when he's pressured and can't escape. The Saints can't overlook Heineke's mobility, something that burned them a little bit with Daniel Jones last week. But you need, with Brandon Scherff out, he's one of the better guards in the NFL. With Scherff out, you need to bring pressure from the inside. Now left guard Eric Flowers is a big, imposing presence. Much like Andrus Peat, he's a converted tackle, so he has the size, working in his advantage. But I look for the Saints to bring interior pressure with blitzes, from linebacker Demario Davis, maybe Caden Ellis, or Zach Bond, because you don't want Ellis or Bond in pass coverage very often. But I look for them to bring interior pressure with a blitzing linebacker, and that hopefully will cause Washington to pinch their pass protection inside, leaving guys like Cam Jordan, Tano Passanio, and Peyton Turner with one-on-one matchups outside. Charles Leno is the Washington left tackle. Leno's a better run blocker than he is a pass blocker. And then over on the right side, you have a rookie, Sam Cosmi. Sam has played pretty well this year, and he looks like a solid offensive lineman from what I've seen on film. But he's not going to have Scherff beside of him. And as we've seen with Cesar Ruiz and Eric McCoy, it helps our young linemen so much to have that veteran experience beside of them. So I'm very interested to see what's going to happen on the right side of Washington's line. And, of course, that's where more often than not our Pro Bowler, Cam Jordan, is going to be lining up. So watch for Cam Jordan, especially in one-on-one matchups on that side of the football today.
And that's been a guy who's been under fire by Saints Twitter over the last few weeks for his lack of sack production. And we said it last week on the pregame show, is though the sack numbers haven't been there, the hurry numbers have been there, and he's a guy who's consistently double-teamed. And he still plays very well against the run. So a guy that definitely needs to come up big, come up with some sacks. And if you look back historically through Cam Jordan's career, he's known for some big 3-4 sack games to help that total bump up. This is a good opportunity against Washington today. Sticking with the defensive side of the ball, last week was a little bit of a breakout game for Saints linebacker. Rookie Pete Werner had a great day, particularly in the second half. What are your evaluations of him, and how do you think the Saints are going to use him, not just today, but moving forward, especially when Quan Alexander returns from injury?
Man, I'll tell you what, I love Pete Werner. I loved him at Ohio State. Love the draft pick when the Saints pulled the trigger on him. Werner is a coverage guy, like you said. He's not as athletic as what Quan Alexander is, but he can fill that same kind of role alongside DeMario if coordinator Dennis Allen runs with a 4-2-5 defensive alignment like he so prefers to do. Werner, he's a little bit undersized for a run defender, but they don't need him to do that. As long as those linemen do their job up front, DeMario is going to be DeMario. You can use Werner in pass coverage. And like you said, I thought he played well each of the last 2 weeks, but he really looked like he had a breakout performance last week. The Washington's going to counter with not only Antonio Gibson, like we just mentioned, but J.D. McKissick, who many Saints fans are familiar with from his days at Minnesota. McKissick is one heck of a pass catcher out of the backfield. So that's going to test those Saints linebackers, Davis, Werner, and perhaps even Bond or Ellis if they get caught in coverage. Look for, we mentioned the probability of Dennis Allen bringing inside blitzes. You probably are going to see Demario Davis used in that capacity more so than Werner, which means Werner is going to be on a bit of an island, either against the Washington backup tight ends or McKissick once he comes out of the backfield.
And McKissick had a great day against the Atlanta Falcons last week for Washington. So still looking to build some momentum. And when you have a healthy Gibson, it could potentially be a great 1-2 punch for Washington. Good news for the Saints. The secondary is good and healthy. Full participant in practice this week was Marshawn Lattimore, still recovering from a little bit of that surgery on his hand. And C.J. Gardner-Johnson good as well. So the Saints look maybe as healthy as they have all year on the defensive side of the ball, minus Quan Alexander. Obviously, still have the suspension to the Big O in the middle and David Onyemata. So let's flip it to the offensive side of the ball. The New Orleans Saints have been not like themselves, I think will be the best way to put it under the Sean Payton era so far. But as I wrote this week, Rome was not built in a day, and neither was the Drew Brees and Sean Payton connection. And I can understand why fans are getting a little frustrated with the Jameis Winston and Sean Payton connection, particularly because Winston's only thrown the ball 23 times. I think last week was so far as high for the black and gold. So what does New Orleans have to do, particularly in this game where you don't have Tony Jones? There's a little bit of a lack of depth at the running back spot. You're expecting a lot more of Taysom Hill in this game, at least running the football. And last week, Alvin Kamara had his first NFL game where he didn't record a target. So how do the Saints move some chess pieces around, get their best player involved, and maybe show the Who Dat Nation a little bit of that electricity that they saw in preseason week 2 and week 1 of the regular season?
Well, first of all, let's start with Kamara, Brendan. I was absolutely appalled that they have not gotten him involved in the passing attack, not only last week at all, but really hardly any usage throughout the season thus far. Brees and Kamara had such a great chemistry that Brees could have delivered the ball to Alvin blindfolded while Alvin was on the move. And that's what you have to do with a back like AK-41. Get the ball to him on the move, not just a check down where he's standing still in open space. You got to use him throughout the formation, run him in motion, put him out of the slot, or even line him out wide. Now, I realize that's going to be a little bit more difficult with Tony Jones Jr. out. We're going to see a lot more of Ty Montgomery from the backfield today. and probably some snaps, some rushes to Divine Ozigbo too. But Kamara is going to be your bell cow as a rusher. We know that. That doesn't mean that you can't get him involved in the passing game. And once you get a guy like Jameis Winston a couple completions, his confidence is just going to increase. And last week we saw that. We saw Jameis with a bounce in his step that we haven't seen from him, during his first few games as a New Orleans Saint. And I think that if you get Jameis on a roll, with some rhythmic passing and rhythmic offensive philosophies early on, it's going to pay dividends for you down the stretch. I think we're seeing Deante Harris, Kenny Stills, and Marquez Callaway both all three get open on a more consistent level. We're seeing the New Orleans pass protection, knock on wood, because they're going to be in for a big test today. That pass protection improved greatly last week, but again, you got to start with Mr. Kamara. You got to get him involved in the offense. I realize he had 24 carries against New England, 26 carries last week, but you need to get him involved as a pass receiver. And once you do that, you're going to see Jameis Winston's confidence grow. And like you wrote about earlier this week, Saints fans, we're spoiled. And not only because we've had so much talent on the offensive side of the ball, but Mr. Number 9 covered up for a lot of potential deficiencies, as we're seeing now. There is still receiving talent on this Saints squad, even before Michael Thomas comes back. You just have to scheme a little bit better to get them open, but that scheme starts with Mr. Kamara.
Yeah, and the New Orleans Saints did sign Kenny Stills to the 53-man roster. Last few weeks, if Saints fans were not aware, he was just a simple practice squad elevation. He's now a part of the 53. I think he's only going to help. And I said this on a podcast earlier this week, Bob. I thought, though the Saints came away with the loss, and even though Jameis Winston had a 5-touchdown performance in week number 1, I still think last week was probably Jameis's best performance start to finish in terms of finding a rhythm that he's had with New Orleans. So that is a positive moving forward. And remember, after the bye week next week, you're looking at potentially getting Traquan Smith and Michael Thomas back. That's only going to help a guy like Jameis Winston. So we've talked about these receivers a little bit. I'm seeing in the chat, and chat, if you have any questions, please drop them in there. They're talking a little bit about Adam Troutman. He's been a little bit of a disappointment, and I think you can eliminate a little bit. He's been a disappointment so far this season for the Saints. Juwan Johnson has only got 6 receptions, but 3 for touchdowns. That's a guy who spent some time in your neck of the woods up at Penn State. But you have a really inexperienced room of tight ends. And Troutman, with the holding call last week, you could point back and say that was the turning point in the ball game. How do the Saints get Adam Troutman, Juwan Johnson a little bit more involved, and how can they continue to grow in this offense?
Well, I think you need to start with Juwan Johnson. He quite apparently has a better rapport and better chemistry with Jameis Winston. I think Juwan is a better athlete than Adam Troutman. But whichever guy you get involved, a tight end is such a great security blanket for a quarterback and a passing game that has had its ups and downs thus far this year. We saw them use Taysom Hill last week in a little bit of a RPO option with Winston. They'll get Jameis on a half roll, and Taysom either breaks out of the backfield or breaks off of the line of scrimmage in that H-back role that I believe we should see more out of Taysom. If you do that same kind of thing with Juwan Johnson or Adam Troutman, both of those guys are good enough athletes that when they get the ball in the open field, they can make guys miss. They can break the tackles of a smaller defender. I think that's how you get the tight ends involved, whether it's Taysom, Juwan, Adam Troutman. You have enough athleticism in your receiving core with Kenny Stills, Marquez, and certainly Deante Harris to be a threat down the field. So you use those tight ends on the shorter routes, those quick hitting things, especially if you have to roll Jameis away from pressure. You're going to have Jameis look downfield at his options and then work back in through his progressions. If Troutman, Hill, or Juwan get in one-on-one matchups against the Washington linebackers, they have some athleticism there, but an awful lot of inexperience. You have to like the way that matchup works out for New Orleans.
Well, we talked about Washington and some of the injuries that they have. New Orleans, only 2 that are inactive because of injury. The rest healthy scratches, but 2 really big pieces and pieces the Saints have missed throughout the season so far, and Eric McCoy and then Teron Armstead, who's expected to miss an extended period of time with an elbow injury. You talked about moving Winston around from pressure, maybe giving some relief to some inexperience on the offensive line. But thus far, how would you grade this offensive line that's been kind of plug and play?
I'd give it a D, maybe a C-, mainly because of pass protection. They performed pretty well as run blockers, but again, you haven't been able to get Kamara in open space, either as a rusher or as a receiver. Now, not being able to get Alvin in open space as a receiver, that's the fault of Winston, Peyton, and the overall passing game scheme. But you need to win those battles at the line of scrimmage to get your best offensive player, your best player, into open space, and that's where the Saints have kind of failed. They've done pretty well getting some push at the point of attack, but they're not opening up those cutback lanes. And the pass protection, it's been many years since we've seen New Orleans Saints pass protection is inconsistent and erratic as we have seen them. Again, they performed much better against a good New York Giants front last week, but they're going to face an even bigger test in what I believe is the best defensive line in the National Football League. So I understand that you're without McCoy, one of the league's better centers. You're without Armstead, in my opinion, the league's best offensive tackle, certainly in the top 2 or 3. But James Hurst is a capable performer. Ruiz, you spent a #1 draft choice on, and I realize he came in and played right guard last week, but he was a collegiate center. So for Ruiz to be performing so poorly in pass protection, in particular, is just mind-boggling to me. I think Calvin Throckmorton has played pretty well, filling in for Cesar's spot at right guard. Andrus Peat, he is what he is. He's a better run blocker than pass blocker. But that's where the problems for the New Orleans Saints lie in their pass protection, is they've been unable to set up a consistent interior pocket for Winston to sit back on those 5- and 7-step drops or out of the shotgun to go through those progressions for a thinned out receiving core that needs a little bit extra time to break open. That's why I do think we're going to see a little bit more rollout, from Jameis, a shorter rhythmic passing, to kind of cover up. Ramczyk played as good as what he has played at all this season against New York. And again, Hurst is what he is on the outside, but you have to, until you get McCoy and Armstead back, you may have to devise different schemes. Keep a guy like Troutman or Juwan Johnson in on passing downs where you need a downfield play for a little bit extra help on those defensive ends, especially with the Washington crew that they're going to face off against today.
Well, sticking with some guys that are injured, potentially coming back, McCoy could certainly come back after the bye. Question from the chat: will David Onyemata's return free up Cam Jordan for more sacks, or do we truly miss a pure nose tackle? Bob, I'll leave that to you. After my opinion there is, I think anytime you get a guy like Onyemata who earned every cent of his extension last year, that doesn't just help Cam Jordan. That doesn't just help the entire defensive line. That also helps your linebackers. That, in turn, ultimately helps your secondary. It's kind of a rippling effect when you have a guy who is a pretty good pass rusher from his spot. He's an excellent run defender. I think it's just going to open up a little bit more for the New Orleans Saints offense. And that's an interesting thing, too, is there was a lot of concerns at defensive tackle this year. And I think that these young guys have done a good enough job plugging the hole that is a huge miss of Onyemata to where it hasn't been a huge talking point of, oh, the Saints are getting gashed up the middle.
Yeah, and you're right. They really haven't. I think I was a little bit surprised to see the team release Christian Ringo, and they needed to create a spot when they elevated and kept Kenny Stills on the active roster. But Ringo was playing pretty well against the run. Malcolm Roach and Shai Tuttle have played extremely well against the run. But none of those guys, we'll stick with Tuttle and Roach. I expect them to re-sign Ringo to the practice squad unless somebody else picks him up. The Tuttle and Roach are going to get the bulk of the snaps at defensive tackle. Now, what the Saints have done is move Passanio inside from the edge on obvious passing situations, but where the Saints have gotten beat with the pass is by first and second down when you have more of your base package in. That's where a guy like Onyemata is going to make the biggest difference, because Big O can make plays on his own. And because of that, it forces extra attention from opposing offensive lines. When you get that, that's what frees up your defensive end. Your Cam Jordan, Peyton Turner, Carl Granderson, who's had a relatively quiet start defensively. So Onyemata is, like you said, he's a spectacular run defender, but New Orleans has done all right against the run. Tuttle and Roach are getting stalemates on their matchups more often than not. They just haven't been able to create much disruption as pass rushers. That's where Onyemata is going to make the biggest difference. And like you said, that causes a ripple down effect. That allows you to be more free with your linebackers. You give a guy like DeMario a freer path to the ball carrier or to the backfield, and that also will create extra pressure on opposing passers, allowing that playmaking Saints secondary to create some havoc on that back end.
Well, with about 5 minutes left here in the pregame, we have certainly talked about many things in this matchup. But if there's one matchup to watch today, Bob, what's that matchup?
For me, it's definitely the Saints offensive line versus the Washington defensive line. There's not many defensive lines I would take over what we have in New Orleans throughout the NFL, but I'll tell you what, I would take this Washington defensive line. They haven't gotten the pressures or the sacks that they did last year, but we know this group is very capable. And Sean Payton knows it too, as well as Pete Carmichael. Jameis Winston has certainly experienced it. And like we alluded to before, without McCoy and Armstead in the lineup, I expect the Saints to keep an Adam Troutman in or a Jawan Johnson in on obvious passing situations, or when they need a play through the intermediate or deep zones for some extra pass protection. Jameis Winston too has to have a better pocket awareness and know what is going on around him. Have that clock in his head to get the ball away out of his hands quicker. But to me, without a doubt, the matchup of the game and that will determine the game is the Saints offensive line versus the Washington defensive line in the running game too, because you need to have balance against this Washington defense.
Well, that's going to be one thing for me to watch, not so much a matchup, but who is the change of pace guy for New Orleans, not just today, but moving forward over the next 3 or 4 weeks? Because we talked about Alvin Kamara. Going into this season, only one time in his NFL career did he record more than 20 carries in a single game. Believe it or not, that was the game he scored 6 touchdowns against Minnesota. So not even a game where he had to carry the ball that much, just because, hey, they were going after a record that may never get touched again. But so far this year, in 4 games, Kamara has eclipsed 20 carries 3 times. He's became a little bit more of the bell cow for the New Orleans Saints. Like we talked about, opposed to being a guy who catches the ball out of the backfield and is just spectacular in that sense with over 80 catches in each of his first 4 seasons. With that, who's going to be the guy that allows Kamara to break off in the slot? Who's going to be the guy that stands in the backfield next to Kamara and Winston in a 22 personnel and creates some difficulties for the defense? We don't really know. You mentioned Taysom Hill could be a guy that could certainly do that. The Saints brought back a familiar face from 2019 this week, stealing him off of Jacksonville's practice squad. But there's got to be someone to step up in that place, and we had even talked about it last week. Needed to see a little bit more out of Tony Jones in terms of touches. He was only getting about 5 to 8 carries a game. We needed to see a little bit more of that, and then he goes down with injury. So just another hurdle, another obstacle in what is kind of retooling and rebuilding one of the best offenses in football over the last decade and a half. But that's one thing I would certainly want to look for today, to see what direction are the Saints going to go. And then you get the bye week and get some healthy bodies back, which is always important. Well, we are going to be back for the halftime report. But, Bob, what is your final score prediction? And who do you think will be the X factor for the Saints today?
Well, first, I think the Saints are going to come out of this with a 24-20 win. We've talked the last few minutes about the Saints offensively. Defensively, I look for this crew to bounce back in a big way. Now, look, Terry McLaurin scares the bejesus out of me. And the Saints are going to try to match up Lattimore on, Scary Terry, as you called him, as often as possible. But I also believe that a bounce back performance is due for not only Paulson and Debo, but we're going to see more snaps from Bradley Roby as well, especially if Samuel is even close to 100%. I think the Saints will be able to shut down Antonio Gibson, who's an extremely talented runner. But I think that they'll be able to shut down the run at least well enough to make put extra emphasis and pressure on Taylor Heineke. And as long as the Saints can get pressure on him, Heineke's going to throw a few up for grabs today, and I think New Orleans can take advantage of that. Offensively, I think I agree with what you said earlier. I think we saw the Saints offense turn the corner execution-wise last week. That's got to give Sean Payton a little bit more confidence in his game planning coming in, and I think as a result, we'll see Payton come out of the gates with a little bit more confidence in Winston in that passing game. But they need to run the ball to keep that Washington pass rush and that Washington defensive line at bay. So I think the X factor, I actually expect a big game from Kenny Stills today. Because Washington has a very good pair of starting cornerbacks, but not a lot of depth there. So if the Saints can get give Washington a multiple receiver look, that's going to free up either Kamara or one of that third wide receiver, be it Stills, Harris, or Callaway. That's going to be your X factor. And there's going to be some sloppy field conditions today. Weather might play a factor. That's not bothered the Saints in recent years. And I like the Saints to come out of this from 24-20.
I think the Saints desperately need a victory. I think it almost feels like a must-win early on in the season because there was so much hype. There was so much momentum after just dismantling the Green Bay Packers in week number 1. You saw the potential, and the bar was up here, and now we have to bring the bar down a little bit and realize that, like I said earlier, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And it's going to take time for everything to kind of get clicking and get moving for New Orleans. But it feels like a must-win, so I'll take the Saints in this one 24-21. We haven't even addressed the fact that there's a new kicker. Don't want to put that much pressure on Cody Parkey, but
that's why I haven't mentioned it.
Yeah, well, I might have jinxed it. There we go. Knock on wood. But I'm actually with you. I think someone in the receiving corps, I think that having Kenny Stills is going to be helpful. You obviously saw the play that got called back last week to a penalty, but still showed that he still got some juice left in the tank. I'm going to go Deante Harris. I also picked him as my Saint to start this week in fantasy football. Obviously, I don't need to tell you guys that you should start Alvin Kamara week in and week out. You probably spent a first-round pick on him. But for Deante Harris, I think it's a big week for him. He is actually 6th in Pro Football Focus in terms of active wide receivers so far this year. And I know you have an opinion on that because I saw the tweet earlier. But I do think he's actually grown as a receiver this year. I thought we saw progress last year. Then the neck injury kind of halted that. But I've definitely seen Harris grow. And if you're able to put him up into the slot, be a little creative, move him around like the little chess piece that he is, you're going to create matchups. And whether it's the long ball or whether it's a bubble screen, the guy's got the afterburners to pick up big yards. So I expect Harris to have a big day today. Jason Williams, one of our favorite people, always wants to come in and comment. Double doink Cody Parkey. Yeah, Saints new kicker. We'll see how that goes this week. But Bob, where can everybody follow you on Twitter and the World Wide Web?
Well, folks, first of all, thank you for tuning in. And make sure you join Brendan and I at halftime, hopefully with big smiles on our faces. But you can follow me on Facebook, Bob Rose. We're over on Twitter at BobbyR2613. And obviously, all of our work can be followed through the Saints News Network, SI.com team channel, or at Saints News over on Twitter.
And for myself, you can follow me, Brendan Boylan, over at BT Boylan on Twitter and Instagram. Follow all of our work with the Saints News Network. We've had a big day of articles. I think we had 4 or 5 come out this morning. So plenty to read up on as you have about 25 minutes until kickoff. And you guys will come back, hopefully, and join us at the halftime. Again, that's Bob Rose. I'm Brendan Boylan, and we'll see you then.